Good morning. Well, we've just gotten through Easter and he is alive. Isn't that great? We get to move forward as we continue our study in Genesis. It gives us an opportunity to look back on Jacob and his wrestling match. That's what we'll start on today. Is this wrestling match? And your writer here in your book, your Sunday school material, calls this wrestled. It begins with Genesis chapter 32 and down to verse 22. That's where we'll start. Let me give you some ideas of it. Have you had some life changing moments that you can think of, such as um, meeting your spouse, your first child, your first grandchild? We just had one born this past week. Kennedy is new to the world and is our seventh grandchild. So we're excited about that. And that's where I'll be today, is celebrating with our family this birth of this child, Kennedy. And so that's where I'll be. But you'll get to be here and be part of our worship. And as we start our April lunch DT, want to invite you to be a part of that as well. Right after the morning service, we'll have DT. We're excited. Randy Etheridge will be sharing in our adults. Regina will be leading our parenting class. Tanner, our students. Then we have a class for our children and preschoolers. So we're excited about that today and hope that you can be a part of it as we do this for the next 4 Sundays, so that we can get our spring discipleship training in. Lunch DT is what we call it. Right after the service, we'll have pizza burgers, and then we'll have the study from 12 to 1, and then you'll be able to enjoy your afternoon with your family and also think about what we have studied in Sunday school and worship and in discipleship training. So we're excited about that. All right, go back to the question that I asked. Can you think of some life changing moments that have happened to you? Some are even terrifying. A wreck, a disaster, maybe a tornado, or your house burned, or a car wreck. Some things that stand out in our lives. Our life is all about change. Most of us don't like change, but life has a way of intervening. Circumstances intervene that we're not expecting, that we're not always prepared for. And these are life changing, especially when we lose someone that we care about. It's life changing because that person, you lose that relationship and you miss it. You'll always miss it. So, how are people often resistant to this change? Some people don't accept it. Some people, I guess you could use the term waller in it, that they get stuck in that, either depressed or damaged psychologically, physically, emotionally. So there are some things, but most people are reluctant to change. And in our story today, we're going to see that Jacob is this way, and he has an encounter. And it's a wonderful encounter. This is one of my favorite. In fact, when I was in seminary, this passage was the one I prepared for my paper that I did for that semester on Genesis in Hebrew. And so this, to me, was one of my most exciting passages as I studied about all of this in detail. We won't go through all that detail because, believe me, I put a lot of hours into that paper. But I do have it. I even got it out. I have my paper right here. And as you can tell, it is so old that it was typewritten. You can see right there. It says an exegetical paper submitted to Dr. Billy K. Smith at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary for the requirements of the Old Testament exegesis of Hebrew. So, wonderful time. But I've read that again, enjoyed reading it and remembering how hard I'd studied and prepared to that to get my A. So let's dive in. Come on, let's look at verse 22. Chapter 32, verses 22 through 24 right here is the setup. So verse 22. During the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 slave women, and his 11 sons, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream along with all of his possessions. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. All right, some interesting things. Let me tell you how this story sets up. You remember, he has left his father-in-law, Laban. He's worked for him for over 14 years. If you remember, he met Rebekah, wanted to marry her. He went into a contract agreement with Laban that he would work for 7 years for her hand. And then on his wedding night, the trickster got tricked as Laban switched out Rebekah for her older sister. That's right, Leah. And he switched her out. And the next morning when he woke up, expecting to kiss Rebekah over there, instead it was her older sister, Leah. He was mad, upset, comes and confronts his father-in-law. And his father-in-law says, well, we have a custom around here. The younger one can't marry before the older one's given away. But it's okay. It's okay. You can have her. And I will also give you Rebekah for 14 more years. 7 more years of labor. 7 more years. So he worked for 7 years, and he didn't get Rebekah until after the wedding night. And he had to work 7 more years. He was tricked into it. And so he did. And then, as you remember last week, we talked about where Laban realized that because of Jacob, God had blessed Jacob, so therefore he had also blessed Laban, and that all of his sheep and goats had grown from a little bit to a huge flock. And Jacob was ready to leave, and Laban said, hey, I want you to stay. I need you. I know I've been blessed by you. What can I pay you? And so you remember that story. Jacob then said, I'll take all the ones you don't want, the spotted ones, the speckled and streaked ones, the black ones. I'll take all the ones you don't want. And that way you'll know I've always been truthful to you, because when you look at my flocks, they're going to look bad. They're going to look spotted, streaked, black. You know, that wasn't considered the best. The best were the white ones, the ones without blemish is the way it was looked at. And so Jacob prospered. And now he has decided to leave and go back to his homeland with his flocks, with his wife and children. And you remember, it says 2 wives. God intentionally wants us to have 1 wife. That's the biblical model. But during this age and time, it was not unusual for men to marry other women. Usually, if the first wife could not bear children, then they would marry a second wife so they could have children. The children were very important in the development of their society. And so they allowed for more than 1 wife. And we know, because of all this, that not only did he have 2 wives, he had 2 servants that became his wife or mistress, if you want to say that the wives gave to him. And that's why he has 11 children so far. And so he takes them, divides them up. Why? he has heard that Esau is on the way. His scouts have found out that Esau was on his way, but he wasn't by himself. He had 400 men with him. Now, I want you to understand, you remember several weeks ago when Jacob went to sleep on his journey. He was running from Esau then. But when he went to sleep that night in Bethel on a pillar of stone, that God visited him and he had a dream of a ladder going back and forth. And he made a vow to God that if God would bring him back, he would give him 1/10 of everything. And that it was his first encounter with God. Now, has he been having some encounters with God? Has he been worshiping God? I think so. But just like a lot of us in our lifetime, he's been concentrating on his family and on his work a lot more than his spiritual relationship. And here, God confronts him again as he's coming back into the territory. It's a very interesting encounter. He wrestles during the night after he's taken his family across for protection because Esau's coming. Now he's alone. I want you to know that sometimes, for men in particular, being alone really helps them think out their life situations. When bad things happen to us or even great opportunities, many times men need to get alone and process this information. I think that's what Jacob is doing. He has a plan to protect his family. He also has a plan to try to appease Esau because he doesn't know if Esau's still angry with him. In fact, he pretty much thinks Esau is still angry at him because he's coming with 400 men. You don't have to come that much against a family. But he's having to wrestle himself. This is the irony of this story, is that Jacob is also wrestling within himself situation. And God puts it on a spiritual level. This is just not economic or family. This is also a spiritual level that he is bringing into this. So let me ask you about this. How can time calm our anxiety? How can this time alone, getting by yourself, how can that calm our anxieties and give us clarity? Well, I bet many of you like to get alone, to process events, information, emotions. I know, my son lost his wife in a car wreck, and he spends that time alone to grieve, and that's when he talks with God. That's when he talks about his emotions. That's when he expresses his emotions. It's when he's by himself. It's a great time to process your life. And so many of you have done the same thing, and it does calm us down, doesn't it? To be able to talk it out, to think it out. Some of you write things down in a diary or online diary that you can express your emotions. Sometimes you want to talk with somebody else even. And really, you don't want them to talk. You want them to listen, like your spouse. And those are still great times to calm our anxieties, is when we process. It gives us clarity. Hosea chapter 12, we see a little bit about this information about what was going on with Jacob as he wrestled. In Hosea chapter 12, verses 3 and 4, it says about Jacob, in the womb he grasped his brother's heel, and as an adult he wrestled with God. Jacob struggled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He found him at Bethel, and there he spoke with him. It brings those two stories, one of the dream, Bethel, and one at the Jabbok, the wrestling. This is so important that even Hosea mentions it as part of Israel's history, which we're going to say this is going to be quite a change, a name change here. So let me give you the second section, a new name. Have you ever gotten a nickname? I've had several, but thank goodness none of them have stuck. Just like I have a friend growing up when I was a boy that if I ever hear the word Adge, I know it was Jack D. Sims. That's what he called me all the time. Don't know why. Except it's a kind of a shortening of my dad's real name, Algernon, and he'd call me Adge. Only person to do it, but he did. You know, there's also one of our church members here that has a nickname for me. And he's the only one that uses it, except for also his son. And they like to call me Louis. That's because my first name is Louis. And so sometimes they say, Louis, how you doing? So there are nicknames. We see here Jacob is going to be given a new name. And it's going to be one that sticks too. But what the Bible does, in the Old Testament in particular, it's really concerned about names and the meaning of the names. There in Hosea, it tells us that when he was born, Jacob was given the name Jacob because he was holding on to the heel of his brother. And they used a word called supplanter, which meant holder onto the heel. And in Hebrew, that name is Jacob. So Jacob was the deceiver, the holder onto the wheel, the supplanter, the trickster. And as I said before, he met his match in Laban up there when on the wedding night, Laban switched the daughters. Well, it's time for not only a name change, a new nickname, but a character change. I told you that Jacob first met God there at Bethel, and he called it the house of God because he encountered God, and it was his first real encounter. Here is his second encounter. I bet you when this person jumps Jacob, he immediately thinks it's Esau, but it's not. And as he wrestles, these ingredients of the wrestling match show us the internal struggle that you and I also have spiritually. So let's look at that. Verses 25 through 29. It says, when the man saw that he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Then he said to Jacob, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. Jacob, he replied. Your name will no longer be Jacob, and it will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he answered, why do you ask me my name? And he blessed him there. This is very, very deep. I spent my whole paper probably a few verses as it brings in some really significant theological ideas about your name, your character, your striving here. So let me give you a chance to hear about this as I kind of give a commentary on it. As it says, Jacob was wrestling with him, and it was a draw. They couldn't defeat each other. Now, I want you to know that God at any time could have defeated Jacob without any trouble. But this was a learning activity for Jacob. It says that he could not defeat this man, and So the man struck Jacob's hip as he wrestled and dislocated it. It's a wrestling move, you might have said, but as I studied on that, I says God at any time could have destroyed him, hurt him. Instead, he just touched him. This move touched him and dislocated his hip, so he could not continue to try to win the wrestling match. Instead, now what he must do is hold on and hope for the draw. Because he knows with that hip dislocated, he's pretty much defeated. He begins to realize that that touch was not a touch of a normal man. My hip would not have been dislocated by any other person, but this person touches my hip, strikes my hip, and it becomes dislocated. Now, what does he do? Notice what it says. And he said to Jacob, let me go, for it's daybreak. Of people have said, why did he say, Jacob, let me, why did this angel say to Jacob, let me go, for it's daybreak? I like what one commentator said. One of the old commentators said that this angel had a singing part in the morning choir, and he needed to get back to his job. I thought that was a great commentary. You know what? We don't know. It's part of the mystery of God. Other commentators, and what I think is that this revealing of God as day breaks, it's time for this to be over. And he says, just let me go. We've wrestled all night. It's time. He's already touched his hip. Just let me go. I'll grant you the draw. This is part of the meaning of Jacob's name, in that he gets in here. Listen to how he does it. And he says, but Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. You see, Jacob wants something out of this. And I believe he realizes he's wrestling with God now. And he wants blessing. He knows that God could have defeated him, but he didn't. He knows that he can't win. So what does he want? He wants a blessing. He wants God to give him grace, to give him something he does not have. This is a deepening of a relationship when Jacob can ask, God, would you bless me? It's not about materially. It's not about a family. He already has 11 kids, 4 wives. He doesn't need any more of that. He has plenty of flocks, all like that. What's his blessing? His blessing is in this relationship. Bless me. Listen to how he says this. I will not let you go unless you bless me. And so the angel, the man here, what is your name? Jacob, he replied. Now, you say, well, why would he ask him his name? He knows who he is. He wants Jacob himself to admit to his name because there's a change coming. You were once known as Jacob, the trickster, the one who tried to get your way all the time and trick people out of your birthright, your blessing, out of Laman, all of these things. But you don't have to trick people anymore. And because of that, I'm going to give you a new name, because God, this encounter with God is going to change you. It's already changed him physically, because now he's going to walk with a limp. But it's also going to change him spiritually by receiving a blessing and recognizing I have been struggling with God even in my own life. So what's he going to do? Your name, the angel says, will no longer be Jacob. He says it will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Well, how did he prevail? How was he successful? It's in his recognition that his struggle, if you remember, his struggle with Esau, he saw how Esau was so upset, and he took that and filed it away. He doesn't really want his brother to be angry at him. He's also wrestled with God and understood God still loves me and has now changed my name forever. And I will now be known as Israel, the nation of Israel. Why? The 12 sons of Jacob. And Jacob's new name is Israel. It's going to be a whole country's name. It's going to be his new name. It's going to have prestige. It's going to have a commitment to God. It's going to have a way of life dedicated to God from this point on. We all mess up. We still make mistakes. But Jacob has now grown in his faith. And God says, no longer Jacob, Israel. For you have struggled with God, wrestled with God and man, and prevailed. Success by knowing both, having a relationship with both. And listen how he says it. Jacob asked, tell me your name. He wants to know the angel's name. Notice his request goes unanswered. It's not given to him. No, you're not going to know my name. But instead, this is what he said. But he answered, why do you ask me my name? Do you want power over me? That was one of the Eastern culture's thing, that if you knew somebody's name, you could have power over them. It was this idea of control. And so he doesn't do it, but it says, and he blessed him there. What he asked for, but not in the way that he thought. This blessing is one that is spiritual. He has been face to face with God. Now, let me ask you a few questions. How did receiving a new name set the future course for Jacob? What happened after that? Y'all can talk about that in your class. Be a great way. Give me some illustrations of what God did with this. And another question, how can a change in identity, who I am, serve as a blessing? Well, if you remember back to the Abraham blessing, God is going to continue that. Abraham is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, Jacob's dad, the God of Jacob, the God of Israel from now on. You see, it's an encounter and this progressive blessing that God will multiply. God will grant this land that you're going to be on as an inheritance. God is going to be your God and you'll be his people. All of this comes into action here. And the last one is the new walk. Look at verses 30 and 32. Jacob then named the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been spared. Sun shone on him as he passed Peniel, limping because of the hip. That is why still today the Israelites don't eat the thigh muscle that is at the hip socket, because he struck Jacob's hip socket at the thigh muscle. Now, this change has, this one encounter changes even the eating habits of the Israelites down for the rest of time. Why? Because of this encounter with God. Let me ask you, how did Jacob's actions demonstrate trust in God? Through all of this, what actions did Jacob have that showed he trusted in God? Good discussion for y'all to bring up. Look at the details of the passage. The second question is, when have you encountered God in a time of great need? When have you encountered God in a time of great need? Has God been faithful to you? Did he teach you to trust him in that great need? I'm sure if you're listening this today, you have many examples of how God has met you in a time of need, and you too have overcome that need through God's help, through God's blessing. One other question. What positive difference would people see in you before you became a Christian and after you became a Christian? What would be some positive differences people could see in you? That's a great way to give your testimony. Is the way I was before Christ, or before I surrendered to Christ, and the way I'm after Christ, or today. What is God doing in my life today that helps me walk closer to him? Hope you can give great illustrations of that this week. It has been great sharing you this testimony of Jacob and his wrestling match with God, and how he came face to face with his own weaknesses, his own strengths, and yet he could ask God to bless him. He saw that he could not succeed and needed God's blessing. From this point on, he will be Israel. And it's an important distinction in his life, because now he will walk closer with God. Not perfectly, but he will walk with God. I hope that you can too. Please take this message to heart. If you need to make a change, every day is a new day. Give that over to God and allow him to help you process, to grow deeper with him by reading God's word, by talking with him, spending time alone. I told you that's what Jacob had to do to wrestle with some of his own things, his own thinking, his own mental abilities and strengths and weaknesses. And now he realizes he needs God. He needs to trust God more than anything. We pray for you. Father, bless those that are listening today. Grant them peace. Help them as they develop this relationship with you, as you help them see that they can trust and have faith. And Father, we do. All those that are listening today, may you bless them with your presence. May you bless them in relationships, not only with you, but with their family, their neighbors, their friends, and those here at church. God bless them in that gracious name.